My name is John Losey with the IntoWisdom Group, and I wanted to come on and offer some thoughts on Zoom fatigue. We've been hearing a lot about it for this past year since virtual meetings and programs and events have become so popular. You've heard the term Zoom fatigue battled around back and forth. And I wanted to offer some thoughts on what it is, what causes it, how is it even real, and how we might be able to avoid it if it is real. So I'm offering this workshop series of videos, and I'm working on some resources and workshops on Zoom fatigue. This first video is going to be just about what is it, what causes it, and is it real? So let's dive into this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, first of all, what is Zoom fatigue? Zoom fatigue describes the tiredness, stress, burnout that you can feel after being in an online meeting or environment for prolonged periods of time. And so that generally that's this feeling that a lot of us have after a day of staring at a computer, interacting with people. We feel extremely, sometimes it's expressed as tired. Sometimes it's where we misplace our stress and put it on something or someone else. So that's kind of how we're working definition of Zoom fatigue. It's not just Zoom. It's any of the virtual platforms. Now, recently in February, there is a article that was published in the APA Open journal by a man named Jeremy Bailenson, who from Stanford, but he kind of put together kind of the first real analysis of what could be some of the causes of Zoom fatigue. And since then, we've been using that term for quite a while, since March, April of 2020. But Bailenson put together kind of, okay, these are some of the things that might be causing it. They haven't done direct studies on Zoom, but they're using what they've known from studying. I mean, virtual meetings, video conferencing has been around for a while. So they're using what they've learned in the past studying these types of interaction. And he came up with 4 different things that might be the causes of that Zoom fatigue. And in this series, what I'd like to do is cover each of those 4 different areas and talk about what you can do as a participant to help fight that fatigue or stress that you might feel. And also as a designer, presenter, facilitator, how you can go about helping your participants avoid that fatigue. But first, let's just talk a little bit about the 4 areas that he talks about. The first one is this thing called excessive eye contact, or excessive amounts of eye gaze. What they're talking about is this mismatched intimacy that you can get by staring closely at other people all day long or for prolonged periods of time. If you have it in the speaker mode where the faces are really big, then it can be this feeling that that person is just in your face for an extended period of time. And that creates this sense of intimacy or false intimacy. We're not used to being that close to acquaintances, colleagues, friends. That type of closeness is reserved for our loved ones, the people who we're intimate with. The other side of that, even if you're using, well, can't we just switch to the gallery view? Well, in there, he equates it to the studies that are done in elevators, where you're surrounded by these people in too close proximity, elevators and subways, and the tendency is to avert your gaze, look down at the floor so that you don't have eye contact. And yet in virtual meetings, you are not required, but the norm is to maintain eye contact for extended periods of time. And what this whole mismatched intimacy is one thing that causes stress and fatigue, but there's another piece of this where that type of eye contact can also create the feelings of aggression or confrontation. And some say that might be causing us to go to a fight or flight when we're in a confined space with people who we don't know that well, when we can't assume best intentions. So that's the first piece of this. The second one is, it talks about cognitive load. When you're in these meetings for extended period of time, but also he talks about, and this idea that we don't have the same amount of nonverbal cues to work off of. So we have to work harder and put more information in. We have to put out more information. We tend to speak louder when we're in the virtual meetings. We tend to over gesture, point, all those types of things in these virtual meetings. And because we have to give more nonverbal cues, we also are looking for nonverbal cues that aren't there. All this causes more mental stress or cognitive load. And what I mean about cognitive load is that is basically cognitive load is the amount of information that your working memory could hold at one time. And as that capacity as it reaches capacity, our ability, our effectiveness goes down. So in essence, your effectiveness goes down as your cognitive load increases, which that's another source of stress and fatigue. So we have the excessive amounts of close-up eye gaze. We have increased cognitive load as causes. Another interesting phenomena is that we end up looking at ourselves all day long. It's like walking around with a hand mirror, looking at yourself that whole time. And that prolonged, they call it the all-day mirror effect. And that all-day mirror means that we do more self-evaluation. Now, self-evaluation isn't a bad thing. However, too much self-evaluation, too many opportunities to take a close look at ourselves can point us to the negative. And what that does, increased self-evaluation can increase the negative affect that we have. As we look at ourselves, we tend to see the negative parts of it. So that increases stress, and that increases fatigue and tiredness. So you've got close-up eye gaze, you've got cognitive load, you've got all-day mirror effect. Another piece that we have going on is the fact that we're sitting at our desks, and we have a high need to stay in camera. For most of us, if you don't have a stand-up desk or whatever, you're sitting for extended periods of time. So that decreased mobility or the decreased physical ability to move around has really negative effects, not only on our energy, but also on our effectiveness, our cognitive function, just your brain part, but also your energy part. So the cognitive function, as you decrease your mobility, your cognitive function goes down. So those are kind of the four areas of that Bernson, excuse me, I mispronounced his name, that Bailenson talks about as potential causes of Zoom fatigue. That general sense of tiredness and stress that you can get from being in prolonged video conferences. Now, those are the causes. That's what it is. Is it real? I work with a bunch of people who are doing amazingly creative things to make sure that when they are leading a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams or Meet or whatever format that you use, they work really hard to make it engaging, interaction, cause connection. And a lot of them say, you know what, Zoom fatigue is a myth. But I also know, and some of you out there are probably experiencing this as well, that no, you walk away at the end of even a couple of hours of virtual conferencing and you're tired. For you, Zoom fatigue is very, very real, and possibly for these reasons that Bailenson puts out there. So is it real? Yes. Does it have to be? I don't think so. I think all the things that Bailenson puts out there and the other groups are, as they're studying what is Zoom fatigue, I think Zoom fatigue is real and it's avoidable. So in this series, what we're going to do, I'm going to do one video on each of these different potential causes of Zoom fatigue. And in those, we're going to talk about what it is, why it causes it, what we can do as participants to avoid Zoom fatigue, but also what we can do as facilitators, presenters to avoid Zoom fatigue as well. So look for those coming out there. I'll do them live like this. And then you'll be able to go on YouTube or Facebook and review them, look at them again. I'm also going to be offering some workshops where not only do we present this information, but together we work through options of how we can avoid Zoom fatigue ourselves and also help our participants avoid that too. So look for those things coming up. Thanks. Comment on in any of the platforms on what you think of Zoom fatigue. Are these things accurate as far as causes? And I'd love to hear your ideas on how we can all avoid both having Zoom fatigue and inflicting Zoom fatigue. So have a great day. Want to encourage you to be present and kind as you go about doing great things today.